Hello everyone, welcome to Cashcroft TV. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. Thank you very much for watching this episode of Ages of Empires, where we will be going through all the major world empires throughout history. This is a particularly fascinating one for me, as we will be covering the Roman Kingdom and the Amphictyonic League. So the Roman Kingdom we will be covering the Roman history we'll be covering in three parts. First, we will cover here the Roman Kingdom. Then we will cover the Roman Republic paired with another empire. And then we will cover the Roman Empire formerly called, paired with another empire as well. As for the Amphictyonic League, I first learned about this through the 18th Federalist Papers, where Alexander Hamilton and James Madison hypothesized that maybe the Amphictyonic League was most analogous to the Confederated States at the time. So this is something I've been very fascinated about, and it's not necessarily an empire as with some of the other empires we have covered, but nor is the Roman Kingdom necessarily either. So I thought it's something important to cover, especially as we just covered Sparta and Athens as well in their respective leagues, the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League. So this is a very important league, I think, as well to cover. And also another nuance of this video is we will have, as with every other episode, we will have highlight a major leader from each. However, for the Amphictyonic League, as there was no necessary leader, as there was the Temple of Delphi, but they most admired perhaps the god Apollo, so we will have a god here. Tarquin himself, however, is a king, so comparing a god to a human is not quite fair, but nonetheless we will stick to the structure for this. So without further ado, we will begin with the first empire and leader. So this is right now, part of the inspiration is that I am reading Gibbon's Decline and Fall of the Roman Empire. However, that starts at the empire phase. So this comes long before. So previously, if one wants to learn about the Roman Kingdom, I suggest one starts with Plutarch's Parallel Lives, the lives of Romulus and Remus, as well, for example, Numa Pompilius, two of the earliest kings of the Roman Kingdom. But nonetheless, we will go through our history here. So the Roman Kingdom was the earliest phase in the history of Rome, traditionally dated from the city's legendary foundation in 753 BCE to the establishment of the Roman Republic in 509 BCE. Much of the early history of the Roman Kingdom is based on legend and myth, and historical accuracy becomes reliable as one approaches the establishment of the Roman Republic. So as we go further back in history, it's more clouded with myth and perhaps less accurate, but we will try to cover it as best as possible. So starting with the foundations and monarchy from circa 753 to 509 BCE, but we won't go to 509 yet. Starting in 753 BCE, the foundation of the Roman Kingdom. As for its legendary founding, according to legend, Rome was founded by Romulus and Remus, twin brothers raised by a she-wolf. Romulus is said to have killed Remus in a dispute over the founding of the city, becoming the first king of Rome. There was a dispute about how many eggs of an eagle they could find, and supposedly whether or not Romulus won, he fought to get his victory and become the first king of Rome. As for the seven kings, Rome is traditionally believed to have had seven kings: Romulus, Numa Pompilius, Tullus Hostilius, and Ancus Marcius, Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, and Servilius Tullius, and Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. Tarquin the Proud, the last one we will cover in a specific biography. As for Numa Pompilius, who is the second of the kings of Rome, Numa was the second king is credited with introducing various religious and legal reforms. It's important to note that he actually came from Sabine origin, so at the outset the Romans were a mixture of the Latins, formerly called, and the Sabines, and it was important that the second king of Rome came from Sabine origin. And he is also the one who brought much of the religious rites into Rome. As for expansion and development, circa 616 BCE, starting this period, Tarquin the Elder is his name, or Lucius Tarquinius Priscus, the fifth king, is known for his ambitious construction projects, including the building of the Cloaca Maxima, an extensive sewer system. As for Servius Tullius, the sixth king, Servius Tullius is credited with various administrative reforms, including the establishment of a census and the organization of a Roman society into classes. So, two very important innovations that most other city-states had never even fathomed. As for Tarquin the Proud, the last of the Roman kings, the seventh and final king, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, or Tarquin the Proud he is also called, is portrayed negatively in historical accounts. His oppressive rule and alleged misconduct led to the growing discontent among the Roman people, as we can see parallels later with the Roman Empire. As for the overthrow of the monarchy in 509 BCE, starting with the rape of Lucretia. The catalyst for the downfall of the monarchy was the rape of Lucretia, a Roman noblewoman, by Sextus, the son of Tarquin the Proud. Her suicide prompted a revolt against the tyrannical rule of the Tarquins. So that's some just grounds. I think it's quite a crime, and just because he's king or son of the king doesn't mean they should be getting away with that, and led to this rebellion. As for the establishment of the Republic, the Roman nobility, led by figures such as Lucius Janius Brutus, not to be confused with Brutus, who A to Brute, who was involved in the assassination of Julius Caesar. This is a different Brutus, overthrew the monarchy and established the Roman Republic around 509 BCE. This event marked the end of the Roman kingdom and the beginning of a new political era. It's important to note that much of the early history of Rome, as mentioned, especially the regal period, is a blend of historical fact and legend. The stories surrounding figures such as Romulus and Remus, while foundational to Roman mythology, lacked the concrete historical evidence found in later periods of Roman history. But it's always important, I think, to think back about this. Gibbon didn't dabble into the Roman kingdom or the Roman Republic, but I think there's a lot we can learn about the Roman Empire, formerly called, by learning more about the Roman kingdom, as sparse as the information may be. So as for Tarquinius Superbus the Proud, a life of him. The historical accounts of Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, once again, commonly known as Tarquin the Proud, the last king of Rome, are primarily derived from ancient Roman sources such as Livy and Plutarch. But there's no specific biography of Tarquin in Plutarch's parallel lives. While his biography is often intertwined with legends and myths, certain historical elements are generally accepted, which we shall share here. So as for his early life, Tarquin the Proud is believed to have been born around the 6th century BCE into an influential Etruscan family of Tarquinius. He was not the natural heir to the throne, but came to power through the murder of Servius Tullius, his father-in-law and the 6th king of Rome. So it was not even hereditary at this period, so it's starting to look very much mirror the Roman Empire, as we will cover, where it wasn't hereditary, they would often kill to become the emperor. So they called him a king, but he seems quite a bit like an emperor at this point, if not named such. As for the reign as king, Tarquin's reign is characterized by ambitious construction projects and military conquests. He completed the construction of Cloaca Maxima, an extensive sewer system, and began the construction of the Temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus on Capitoline Hill. Tarquin is credited with expanding Rome's territory through successful military campaigns as well. But for his oppressive rule, historical sources portray Tarquin as a tyrant, ruling with cruelty and disregard for Roman traditions. His despotic actions, including the execution of leading senators, aroused resentment among the Roman people. And further, to the rape of Lucretia. One of the pivotal events during Tarquin's reign was the rape of Lucretia, a Roman noblewoman, by Sextus Tarquinius, the king's own son. The act of violence led to Lucretia's suicide and ignited a rebellion against Tarquin's rule. So, quite a tragic story, at least for Lucretia, and it's really not an elegant way for an empire for a kingdom to end, that's for sure. As for overthrow and exile, the rape of Lucretia and the subsequent uprising prompted the establishment of the Roman Republic around 509 BCE. It's For Lucius Janius Brutus, a key figure in the revolt, played a crucial role in expelling Tarquin from Rome. Tarquin fled to Etruria, seeking support for efforts to reclaim the throne, but his attempts were unsuccessful. As for the legacy, Tarquin the Proud's legacy is largely negative in Roman historiography, with subsequent generations viewing him as a symbol of tyrannical rule. The overthrow of the monarchy and the establishment of the Roman Republic marked a significant turning point in Roman history. While historical accuracy of specific events in Tarquin's life may be debated due to the lack of contemporary records, the general consensus among ancient historians is that his reign played a pivotal role in the transition from the Roman kingdom to the Roman Republic, if not as the antagonist. Something to note in Plutarch's parallel lives in the life of Romulus and Remus, he notes that as Romulus walks off, he sort of leaves the city and walks off with the gold and plated armor and never returns. So Plutarch does know very rarely do leaders have happy endings. Perhaps this was even a fake happy ending. Maybe he died some other way and it was faked, but Tarquin was certainly not one to have a happy ending. And Romulus was an exception. So although Tarquin had quite a bad life, at least he did bad things, or at least his son certainly was a rapist and caused a woman to commit suicide, to have a death and an end of life, such was actually not quite uncommon for many leaders and tyrants throughout history. So to discuss the content of the slide before moving to the next empire. So titled The Roman Kingdom and Tarquin. It was considered the Roman monarchy, the regal period of ancient Rome. Significant leader, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus. Empire, Roman Kingdom, period 753 to 509 BCE, 1,000 square kilometers. There were a few thousand to 10,000, and that's square kilometers. Remove the thousand, so don't do 1,000 times 1,000, pardon me, but it's a few thousand to 10,000, just the size of the size of Rome and the outer lying region. So much smaller than many of the other empires we've seen, but this small kingdom came to be the leading world superpower. So we have to look and delve into why this might have been. Percent of the world, 0.01, but it's much less than that even. Capital city, Rome is one might guess. Government, monarchy. However, some leaders, such as Tarquinius Superbus, did not get the throne hereditarily. Common language, Old Latin. Religion, Roman polytheism, established in large part by Numa Pompilius, the second king of Rome, and population likely tens of thousands, maybe hundreds of thousands, but the cities and it's based off agricultural records and such. So in terms of images, in the top left we have the seal of L. Lucius Tarquin Superbus. To the right of that we have the overthrow of the Roman monarchy, a painting by Sandro Botticelli depicting the rape of Lucretia, as we can see in the center, not actually being raped, but after her suicide, and the subsequent uprising. And this was a painting in the 6th century. So I think it's obviously a very tragic sight, but I actually prefer classical art. So this is kind of my style. So it's something I find obviously a very tragic event, but a key event in the the history of Rome and history more broadly. So very important, critical turning point, at least in Roman history. And I think it's quite a beautiful painting besides the tragic theme. Below that is Tarquinius Superbus makes himself king in the comic History of Rome by Gilbert Abbott of Becket. Circa the 1850s. So another paint. So just going to show the fascination of Rome and Tarquin and the story of the Roman kingdom throughout time. To the right of that we have a Tarquinius Superbus by Lawrence Alma Tadema, who lived from 1836 to 1912, depicting the king receiving a laurel. And the poppies in the foreground are supposedly a reference to the tall poppy syndrome, or tall puppy syndrome, where the tallest poppies get cut. So that's kind of the analogy here, is that those who stood out in the Roman kingdom would be cut down by Tarquinius. To the right of that we have the sort of history. What preceded it was Latial culture, Alba Longa, and Etruscan civilization. As we can see, Tarquinius likely had an Etruscan roots. There was also the sea beans filled into part of the mixture of Roman that created the Roman people, and then succeeded by, as one might guess, the Roman Republic. Kings from 753 to 716 BCE, Romulus. From 715 to 672 BCE, Numa Pompilius. 672 to 640 BCE, Tullius Hostilius. 640 to 616 BCE, Ancus Marcius. 616 to 578 BCE, L. Tarquinius Priscus. 578 to 534 BCE, Servius Tullius, and 534 to 509 BCE, Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, as we biographed. And on the top right, we have a map, as we can see some of the divisions that were created within Rome, even at this time, that sort of had a ripple effect into Rome as it followed the Roman kingdom and then the Roman Empire, which we will cover, and I hope you endeavor to check out if you have not already done so. So moving to the Amphictyonic League, very important league, not necessarily an empire, but a confederation. I learned about this first through Federalist Paper number 18 by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, and another league, which we will cover, the Achaean League. So, what was this Amphictyonic League? So the Amphictyonic League was an ancient Greek association originally formed for the protection and administration of religious rites, with a primary focus on the sanctuary of Delphi, a place I've been fortunate to visit. It's a religious site at the time, and still even today, supposedly, as some people might still believe, but few people still believe in ancient Greek religion, for better or for worse. The league's history is not well documented, as some other Greek leagues, and much of what is known comes from later accounts in ancient histories, such as Herodotus. He wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War. Herodotus wrote the histories, which I'm fortunate to have read. Thucydides, who wrote the history of the Peloponnesian War, and Strabo, whom I endeavored to get to, but given references much as well. The least obscure and longest-lasting Amphictyony was the Delphic Amphictyony, or Great Amphictyonic League, that was organized to support the greater temples of Apollo and Demeter. We'll highlight Apollo specifically, the god. Its council had a religious authority and the power to pronounce punishments against offenders, which could range from fines to expulsion. So think kind of like the EU or Confederation of States, and to conduct sacred wars. So therefore, they did have a military power if it's for religious reasons. The Amphictyonic League also set the rules of battle so as to protect the sanctuaries and impose sentences on those who molested sanctuaries, so sort of like property of the Confederation, which were religious sites. All members were obliged to pledge themselves by an oath, as reported by Aeschines, who was one of the great orators of ancient Athens. Among the confederacies of antiquity, the most considerable was the Grecian republics associated under the Amphictyonic Council. From the best accounts transmitted of this celebrated institution, it bore a very instructive analogy to the present Confederation of American States, and that's directly quoted out of Federalist Paper number 18 by Alexander Hamilton and James Madison, because they noted that it had the same religion across the Amphictyonic League, the same currency, the same cause against foreign religions, etc., but nonetheless it was insufficient, and therefore the argument in Federalist 18 is they need a federation, not a confederation. So even this, with all the reasons as to why they should stay in the Amphictyonic League, it was insufficient, according to Hamilton and Madison. As for the rise of the Amphictyonic League formation, the Amphictyonic League is believed to have been established in the 8th century BCE. It included representatives from various Greek city-states and tribes. Based on legend, the Greek Amphictyonic League was founded somewhat after the Trojan War for the protection and administration of the Temple of Apollo in Delphi and the Temple of Demeter in Anthela, near Thermopylae. The founding myth claimed it had been founded in the most distant past by an eponymous founder named Amphictyon, brother of Helen, the common ancestor of all the Hellenes. So there's also this lineage connection but making them, they're all Hellenes, they're all descendants of this Hellene and her brother Amphictyon. And therefore, but it was still, that was not enough to keep them together. Representatives of the 12 members, called the Hieromenomonies, met in Thermopylae in the spring and in Delphi in the autumn. The 12 founding populations, enumerated by Aeschines, were the Aenianes or Oetaeans, the Boeotians, the Thebesians, the Dolopes, the Dorians. Dorians are Spartans, are Dorian of descent, but they're not the only Dorian people of Sparta, and the Ionians of Athens. Athenians are Ionian, but not the only Ionians. So we can see there's in the history of the Peloponnesian War, Thucydides notes that the war between Athens and Sparta was not a race war. It was not Dorians versus the Illyrians. It was sort of a there were Illyrians fighting on the Dorian side and Dorians fighting on the Illyrian side, so it wasn't that. But nonetheless, this Amphictyonic League encompassed both Dorians and Illyrians. The League doctrine required that no member would be entirely wiped out in war, and no water supply of any member would be cut off even in wartime. So they sort of will protect the integral parts. They don't want to see another state completely get destroyed. It did not prevent members from fighting about the dominance over temples as well. As for the religious significance, the League's primary purpose was the protection of and management of pan-Hellenic religious sites, particularly the sanctuary of Delphi, sort of like the center of their religion. Members were bound by a common religious affiliation and a commitment to safeguard these sacred places. In historic times, the Amphictyoni might survive as a form of religious organization enjoined to support specific temples or sacred places. Traditional Amphictyonis coordinated Olympic and Pythian games, so they also sort of founded the earliest forms of pan-Hellenic games, specifically the Olympic and Pythian games. 12 members would meet in specific times in the same sanctuary to keep religious festivals and conduct others as well. So sort of really seeing this unity of Greece. Many people think Athens and Sparta and Thebes all completely separate, but they were under this confederation. Even this and this, the earliest of them, only earliest well-known one, and the earliest mentioned by Hamilton and Madison. They reference also the Abbé of Mably, who is a scholar I'd really like to learn more about, but I cannot find any of his English books. Perhaps I could read it in Francais. It would take a long time. But if I can't find an English version, I must have to then. But it's interesting because Hamilton and Madison, I don't believe, spoke French, so I wonder where their copies have gone. Maybe they burned down in the Library of Congress. As for the function and structure of the Amphictyonic League, the Delphic Amphictyoni, the central focus of the League was the Delphic Amphictyoni, a council of representatives from member states. The council convened twice a year, with one meeting held in the spring and one in the autumn. It's noted that the spring one was in Thermopylae, however. As for religious festivals, the League organized religious festivals, including the Pythian Games, which were held every 4 years at Delphi. These games included athletic and musical competitions and were considered one of the most prestigious events in ancient Greece. So sort of, I make this thought, but I'm not necessarily sure it's true, but if people are focused on sport, they're not necessarily focused on war. It's sort of a distraction, perhaps. A good one, and fun to watch as well. As for challenges and decline, starting with internal disputes, the Amphictyonic League faced internal challenges, including disputes among member states. These conflicts sometimes led to military interventions, such as the First Sacred War, circa 590 to 586 BCE, between the Phocians and the Amphictyonic League over control of the sanctuary of Delphi. As for external threats as well, the League also faced external threats, including invasions by the Persians during the Greco-Persian Wars. However, the League managed to survive these challenges, so one of the also causes of reinforcing the Amphictyonic League was the threat of the Persians. But moving to the fall of the Amphictyonic League, it happened but too often, according to Plutarch, but that the deputies in the strongest cities awed and corrupted those weaker. and the judgment went in favor of the most powerful party. So there's a problem with, we see, a confederation, according to Plutarch. However, as we can see in the Federalist system in the United States, they granted 2 senators to each state to sort of balance, so it's not the largest states ruling over the smaller ones. So maybe a senate would have been valuable for, even though they had a senate which was pretty proportional, I believe 12 delegates from each, so nonetheless it wasn't sufficient. Even in the midst of defensive and dangerous wars with Persia and Macedon, the members never acted in concert, and were more or fewer of them eternally the dupes of the hirelings of the common enemy. So many often would sort of cheat their own allies and help the enemy often, or they would feel, or just the larger ones would abuse the smaller ones. The intervals of foreign war were filled with domestic vicissitudes, convulsions, and carnage, according to the Federalist 18. The Macedonian influence. With the rise of Macedon under Philip II and later his son, Alexander the Great, the influence of the Amphictyonic League waned. The Macedonians, though nominally members of the Amphictyonic League, exerted their control over the league and its decisions, so one state became too powerful. Further to Roman interference, in the Hellenistic period, as Rome became a dominant power in the Mediterranean, the Romans began to intervene in Greek affairs. The league had essentially dissolved by this time. Thus, the Amphictyonic League, while not as politically influential as some other Greek leagues, played a crucial role in maintaining and protecting religious and cultural heritage in ancient Greece. Its decline mirrored the larger political change in the Hellenistic and Roman periods. So, very importantly to understand, and sort of there were the Delian League and the Peloponnesian League one could learn about by learning about Athens and Sparta. This Amphictyonic League encompassed almost all the Greek states, or all the major ones, and it's very important to study and learn about, and we can learn more about confederacies today. Maybe lessons can be learned about the European Union from studying the Amphictyonic League. As for the life of Apollo, since there are no specific leader that is specifically associated with the Amphictyonic League, because many of the representatives represented their own states necessarily, so we'll discuss Apollo, who's the major god of the Amphictyonic League. Apollo is one of the most prominent and multifaceted deities in ancient Greek mythology. As the son of Zeus and Leto, and the twin brother of Artemis, Apollo was associated with numerous aspects of Greek culture, including music, prophecy, healing, archery, poetry, and the sun. His mythology and worship extended beyond Greece, influencing Roman and other ancient cultures. It's important to note that Greek mythology is a combination of various stories and interpretations. However, we'll seek to find a detailed portrayal of this god. So, as for his birth and early years, his parentage, Apollo was born on the island of Delos, a place that became sacred to him, and he was the son of Zeus, the king of the gods, and Leto, a titaness. So, titans were massive individuals, but not quite gods, whereas Zeus was the king of the gods, so think of him as the prince of the gods. As for his twin sister, Apollo's twin sister Artemis was born shortly before him. Both siblings were born under challenging circumstances, as Zeus's wife Hera was jealous of Leto and had pursued her relentlessly, so I think we could actually technically call Apollo a bastard, because Hera was his official wife. There's also the analogy that perhaps he's like the god Ra, who is the son of Osiris. As for attributes, but Osiris was married to Isis, and that was his former wife, so not quite a bastard. So Ra was not a bastard, but Apollo necessarily was. As for attributes and characteristics, his epithets, Apollo is known for various epithets reflecting the diverse aspect of his character. These included Phoebus, meaning bright or shiny, Musugetes, leader of the Muses, and Pythian, association with the python, or serpent he slew at Delphi, as we shall see. As for his appearance, Apollo is often depicted as a young and handsome man, with golden hair and a laurel wreath. He was typically shown carrying a lyre, a bow, and arrows. As for his mythological exploits, the slaying of the python. Apollo, shortly after his birth, killed the serpent Python, who guarded the oracle of Delphi. This event established Apollo's association with the prophecy, and he took the title Pythian Apollo. So that's perhaps why the site is based there, which is A beautiful, beautiful site I've been fortunate to visit, and I would recommend to anyone else. And I'd like to go back there again someday as well. As for his musical skills, Apollo was a master musician and played the lyre, often depicted competing in musical contests. He defeated the satyr Marsyas in a musical competition and was involved in a similar contest with Pan. As for his love affairs, Apollo was known for his romantic interests. One of his notable love affairs was with Daphne, who was turned into a laurel tree to escape his advances. So, not as the woman didn't always appreciate his advances. And the pilgrims, furthermore, he was also associated with the love story of Apollo and Hyacinthus. As for the Oracle of Delphi, the oracle role, Apollo became the patron of the oracle at Delphi, which was the center of the Amphictyonic League. So interesting, it wasn't the Zeus temple that was the center of the Amphictyonic League. It was the temple of Apollo at Delphi. There would be a priestess known as Pythia that delivered prophecies in his name. So Python, that link as well. We can also see analogies with the book of Genesis where the snake is talking to, convinces Eve to try the apple. Pilgrims from all over the Greek world sought guidance at this sacred site, the center of the Amphictyonic League. As for Delphic maxims, Apollo was credited with providing a set of moral and ethical principles known as the Delphic maxims. Maybe one that he neglected was he shouldn't chase women too extensively like he did with Daphne, but he's nuanced, and that's a fascinating thing about these Greek gods particularly, is they're nuanced. They're not perfect beings. These maxims were inscribed on the temple of Apollo in Delphi and served as guidelines for proper conduct. As for associations and worship, festivals, the most significant festival dedicated to Apollo was the Pythian Games, which included athletic and musical competitions. Other festivals included the Thargelia and Hyacinthia, named after one of the women he was associated with and had an associated love story as well. As for cult centers, besides Delphi, Apollo was venerated at various sanctuaries across Greece, including Delos, where he was supposedly born, Didyma, and Delos. His worship extended to Rome, where he was known as Apollo. So it's possible we can see that there's a lot of real places he went, and maybe he was, to some extent, based on a real person. Some person who slayed a python born in Delos doesn't seem impossible. As for later aspects and influence, Roman counterpart in Roman mythology, Apollo was identified with the god, Saturn. Or it must be God. It must be the sun. It must be the sun itself. Pardon me, there was the missing information here, but he's associated with a parallel god in ancient Rome and retained many Greek attributes. As for his legacy, Apollo's influence transcended the ancient world and continued to be a significant figure in art, literature, and culture. His associations with the sun, music, and healing persisted through various cultural adaptations. Apollo's multifaceted nature and wide-ranging influence made him a complex and revered deity in ancient Greek world, embodying the ideals of classical beauty, artistic inspiration, and divine wisdom. So that is the Amphictyonic League and Apollo. And now let's discuss the content of the slide. So the title, Amphictyonic League and Apollo, which is, as for the Amphictyonic League, the ancient religious association of tribes, or even city-states at some point. Therefore, it also is an instructive analogy to confederation in the American states, according to Alexander Hamilton and James Madison in Federalist 18, which inspired the U.S. Constitution as well, which many know, but those outside the United States might not necessarily know. As for significant god, Apollo, Empire, Amphictyonic period, circa 700, but even further back into circa 800 BCE to 400 BCE is the prime, but it also went as far as 200 CE under the Roman rule, for example. Modern location, Greece, 1,000 square kilometers, few thousand to 10,000. That's not thousand, that's just few thousand to 10,000 square kilometers. Percent of the world, less than 0.01%. Capital, Delphi, particularly the Temple of Apollo. Government, confederation. Common languages, variations of Greek, because there are many different dialects across many different city-states or tribes that were loyal to the Amphictyonic League and the Temple of Delphi or Apollo. Religion, Greek polytheism. Population, thousands to hundreds of thousands. I would think there would be at least 1,000 employees, like people, or not necessarily employees, pardon me, but priestesses and priests at the Temple of Apollo, but there would be hundreds of thousands that were loyal to the Temple of Delphi. In the top left, we have an image of Apollo being named Apollo Belvedere, which is a Roman copy of the original bronze by the Greek sculptor Leochares. It's a mid-18th century. It was considered one of the greatest ancient sculptures by ardent neoclassicists. Its aesthetic, it was considered aesthetic perfection for Europeans, maybe only later defeated by the statue of David. But as you can see, they sort of knew what an optimal body looked like to some extent, and it was very impressive in that they attributed it to Apollo. Also important to note that he is younger, unlike depictions of Zeus, who is often older, and with the beard, for example. He has no beard. To the right of that, we have a beautiful picture of Delphi, place of unfortunate visit. I recommend anyone visits. Hopefully it doesn't get too busy over time, but it's absolutely a beautiful place. Below that is another one of the walkways in Delphi. To the right of that, we have a map of Delphi, and we can see here in the center is the Temple of Apollo, but there's also theaters and other things as well. And then to the top right, we have a map. Image quality seemed to have deteriorated, but we have a map, and we can see Delphi right there. Athens is over here, and Sparta would have been down here, so sort of bridge the gap between the two city-states and many others, such as Thebes, etc. So that is the Amphictyonic League and Apollo. Now we will go through a comparison between Tarquin and Apollo, as mentioned there. One is a mortal and one is a god, but Apollo was probably based on some mortal individual to some extent. So we'll still go through the process, and we've had to do this before because there was no technical leader of the Amphictyonic League. There was likely a chief priestess, but we don't know their names. So Apollo. But if Apollo was the primary god of the league that united all the confederation, I think it's important to study and compare him. And Tarquin, clearly the last of the Roman kings, that necessarily needs to be studied further. So comparing Tarquin of the Roman kingdom, who was a historical figure and the last king of Rome, with Apollo, a prominent deity in Greek mythology, involves exploring their respective roles, attributes, and contexts within Roman and Greek societies. Therefore, we seek to find a comparison between these two significant figures. Starting with Tarquin of the Roman kingdom, as for his historical context, reality versus myth. Tarquin the Proud, or Lucius Tarquinius Superbus, is considered a historical figure whose life is intertwined with historical development of the Roman kingdom, the historical development of the Roman kingdom. The details of his life are based on historical records, and accounts are often myth or legend, so perhaps much of the life of Apollo, if he was a real person, there's maybe even Apollo was more so shadowed in myth and legend, but that's not to say Tarquin certainly wasn't either. As for a political figure, Tarquin was the 7th and final king of Rome, known for his ambitious construction projects and his oppressive rule, which ultimately led to the establishment of the Roman Republic after the rape of Lucretia by his son. As for his political and military actions, his reign and exploits, Tarquin's reign is marked by his efforts to strengthen Rome through construction projects and military conquests. He completed the Cloaca Maxima, which was a sewage system, and initiated construction of the temple of Jupiter Optimus Maximus. I believe Jupiter is analogous to Zeus, king of the gods. So unlike the Amphictyonic League, they did not necessarily Tarquin did not appreciate Apollo as much as he did Jupiter, perhaps. As for his despotic rule, historical accounts portray Tarquin as a tyrant who ruled with cruelty and disregard for Roman traditions. His oppressive governance and actions contributed to the discontent that led to the establishment of the Roman Republic. And as for his downfall, his role in transition, Tarquin's rule played a crucial role in the transition from the Roman kingdom to the Roman Republic. The rape of Lucretia, a noble woman, and the subsequent uprising against the Tarquins were catalysts for this change. As for Apollo in Greek mythology, as for his mythical context, his deity and myth, Apollo is a major deity in Greek mythology, associated with various aspects of music, prophecy, healing, and the sun. His stories are steeped in myth and symbolism, and he is considered a member of the Olympian pantheon, or pantheon of gods. But like Tarquin, he is still steeped with myth. I'm not necessarily saying that Apollo was a real person, but some aspects of his life could have been accomplished by a mortal. As for being the son of Zeus, Apollo is the son of Zeus and Leto, the twin brother of Artemis. His divine lineage places him among the prominent gods on Mount Olympus, so directly descendant of the king of the gods, but perhaps a bastard, because Leto, Hera, was Zeus's primary wife, whereas Tarquin did not. He actually took the throne. He was not necessarily born into the lineage that should have made him king. He took the throne. Whereas Apollo never necessarily had the throne, but on Earth, or he had the throne because the Temple of Delphi was the center of the Amphictyonic League. As for his attributes and functions, he was a multifaceted god. Apollo was a multifaceted deity with associations ranging from music to poetry, as Musagetes to prophecy, the Pythian Apollo, and healing as Paean. As for him being the oracle at Delphi, Apollo is particularly renowned as patron of the Oracle of Delphi, the centerpiece of the Amphictyonic League, where priestesses delivered prophecies in his name. This role underscores the connection to wisdom and foresight. As for his cultural influence, his artistic inspiration, Apollo is a symbol of artistic inspiration and creativity. He is often depicted with a lyre representing his musical prowess and influence of the arts. As we saw, there were theaters even in the Temple of Delphi. As for his cultural legacy, Apollo's influence extends beyond Greek mythology, as his attributes and associations continue to inspire art, philosophy, and literature in ancient and later cultures. Therefore, a further comparison, as for reality and myth, Tarquin is a historical figure whose actions are recorded in the context of the Roman kingdom's political evolution. Apollo is a mythical deity, and his stories are symbolic narratives that contribute to the broader themes of Greek mythology, but both of them to some extent shrouded in myth. As for roles in transition, Tarquin's reign played a pivotal role in the transition from the Roman kingdom to the Roman Republic. Apollo as a deity is not associated with a political transition, but rather embodies the various aspects of Greek cultural and religious life, and being a center of peace and inspiration of the Amphictyonic League. As for their legacy, Tarquin's legacy lies in the historical transition he witnessed, contributed to, and furthered the establishment of the Roman Republic through the rape of Lucretia by his son, but it was also the culture that he established. He surely, if one trained their son proper, they should not have engaged in that. Apollo's legacy transcends mythology, influencing artistic, cultural, and philosophical developments in ancient and subsequent civilizations. Thus, while Tarquin and Apollo belong to different realms, one historical and the other mythical, their stories reflect the dynamic nature of political and cultural shifts in the ancient Mediterranean world. Tarquin played a role in the historical evolution of Rome, while Apollo's mythological presence symbolizes various facets of Greek culture and religious thought. So, two very important leaders and two very important empires. I very much hope you enjoyed. My name is Kalen Ashcroft. This is Cashcroft TV, and I'd be very, very grateful if you continue to support. Thank you so much.